like, I'm a totally new human being. Before I was like that, and I was bitter, and that's why I was so evil towards black sisters when I went to jail. Because I felt like I didn't sleep with them bitches to be down for y'all. And y'all put me in jail? All right, well, cool, but now I was wrong to have that kind of thought, right?
To his frustration, 1994 began in the same way 1993 had ended, with trouble continuing to haunt Tupac around every corner. Whilst awaiting trial for the New York sex offences, he experienced further jail time for yet another ugly confrontation. Following hard on the heels of his sacking from the John Singleton movie, incessant personal controversy would lead to him being dropped from a second picture, the black urban thriller Menace to Society. Somewhat aggrieved at his removal, Tupac physically challenged the film's director Alan Hughes after storming onto the set of his latest film. The result of this incident was Tupac being sentenced to 15 days in prison for assault. Punishment served, released from the Los Angeles prison, he could be found back in gainful employment, returning to work immediately on a new movie, Above the Rim. As well as starring on screen as neighbourhood gangster Birdie, he also contributed to the mega-selling soundtrack album. The record included the track Pour Out a Little Liquor, recorded by Tupac and his band Thug Life, which went on to sell 2 million copies. It was his earlier music, though, that would return to haunt him yet again, as Courtrooms of America once more took his album Tupacalypse Now to task. It was in September of 1994 that 2 Milwaukee teenagers murdered a police officer, citing the music of gangster rap, and in particular the Tupac track Soldier's Story from his debut album, as their motivation to commit such a heinous crime. While such public outrage was nothing new to Tupac and certainly not uncommon in the genre of gangster rap, this incident further indicated that the genre was taking on a life of its own. A life from which Tupac Shakur and many of his contemporaries would fail to escape with their lives. As 1994 moved forwards, his trial moved closer. From the start of proceedings and throughout, Tupac would court trouble and in fact came close to losing his life before a verdict was reached. On the 29th of November, Tupac, along with a co-defendant, stood charged of molestation of a 19-year-old woman in Tupac's suite at the Parker Meridian Hotel in New York, as well as other related sexual offences and weapons possession. After the opening day of deliberations, the jury took their leave to consider the charges, whilst Tupac headed for a Times Square recording studio. Aware that the penalty, should he be convicted of the charges against him, were a maximum of 25 years in prison, Tupac naturally wished to make the most of the time he had at his disposal. His recording plans were not realised, however, as Tupac became the victim of an armed robbery as he entered the building. He was shot at least 4 times as the perpetrators disappeared with a diamond ring and gold chains worth in excess of $40,000. He managed to remain conscious in spite of his bullet wounds and was even able to make a call to his mother in Atlanta before being rushed to the nearby Bellevue Hospital, where, as Tupac continued to bleed heavily, the decision was made for him to undergo intensive surgery. A 12-strong team of surgeons worked on his beleaguered right leg, and a damaged blood vessel was repaired. Having been discharged from surgery at 4 p.m, Tupac, against the wishes of astonished doctors, checked out of hospital and was escorted by his mother amidst a throng of gathered reporters. The following day, to the surprise of onlookers, he turned up at court in Manhattan, heavily bandaged, to learn of the jury's decision about his future. After an uncomfortable session in court, punctuated by a visit to a nearby hospital for treatment on his leg, which had become severely numbed by constant sitting in court, he returned to hear the jury's decision. When the verdict was returned, it was one which reflected mixed fortunes for Tupac. He was found guilty of the sexual abuse charge but was acquitted on those of sodomy and weapons possession, each of which carried a stiffer penalty than his actual conviction. In deference to his medical condition, sentencing was delayed and he was granted limited freedom on bail of $25,000. It was accepted, though, that Tupac would probably receive a lengthy custodial sentence, although his lawyer, Michael Warren, confirmed he would seek leave to appeal against the conviction. Tupac was already aware that a prison sentence was likely and had spent time wisely accumulating recorded material for release in his absence, thus keeping his name in the press and his career suitably maintained. In February of 1995, Tupac's great expectation became a reality, as he discovered his new home would be that of the Rikers Island Penitentiary in New York. The glamorous yet dangerous lifestyle he had acquired as a chief mover in gangster rap, a musical genre he had arguably come to represent in recent years, was snatched away from him as he was jailed for a maximum of 4.5 years.
I was the truest nigga involved with Biggie's success. I was the biggest help, but he know how much he borrowed from me. He know how I used to stop my shows, let him blow up and do his whole show in the middle of my show. How I used to buy him shit and give him shit and never ask for it back. How I used to share. How I used to share my experiences in the game and my lessons and my rules and my knowledge on the game with him. You know what I mean? He owed me more. He was about to blow my fucking head off.
The new album, when finally released, saw Tupac set out his stall with verve and vision. His opening product for the Death Row label was mammoth in every sense of the word. A sprawling double CD, the first in the history of rap music, containing 27 tracks, hit the streets on the 13th of February 1996. Under the title of All Eyes on Me, it was a recording in which Tupac spent every track righting the many wrongs he felt he'd suffered at the hands of his admittedly numerous enemies. The fact the record was released over 2 discs was testimony to the sense of wrongdoing to which he felt he'd been subjected, as well as being a welcome release of the pent-up emotions he had garnered throughout his time in prison. The record was a hit almost before its release, such was the hype and sense of anticipation that surrounded the album. The early predictions proved correct as the album went on to sell in excess of 5 million copies in its first few weeks on sale, as well as making the crucial breakthrough into the R&B charts and the mainstream. This latest recording, though, had many other connotations for Tupac, laying bare, as it did, a brand new career agenda for himself, making good on his earlier promise to expend more energy on his career than promoting the lifestyle he had since renounced. His future in music reaffirmed thanks to another huge-selling album. It was time to switch back into films, and he was about to make his highest-profile moves yet upon the cinema industry. In 1996, he appeared in Bullet with friend and Hollywood veteran Mickey Rourke. The movie, a gangland action thriller, eerily mirrored Tupac's own life, featuring both he and Rourke as gang members in the centre of an ugly urban conflict, struggling to come to terms with their violent rivalry despite a grudging respect for one another. In that same year, he began filming another movie that would confirm his growing reliability as an actor. In Gridlocked, he'd shared lead billing with rising British actor Tim Roth. In the film, directed by Vondi Curtis Hall, the pair played mismatched drug addicts from Detroit, attempting to kick the habit in a variety of government-sponsored detox programs. Tupac, already used to plaudits for his acting skills, received a huge round of applause across the movie press for his performance as jazz performer Spoon, holding his own alongside the more experienced Roth. Despite industry gossip whispering that Tupac was about to make that all-important arrival into the mainstream movie arena, there proved, however, to be a tragic twist in the tale. For fate conspired to ensure Tupac would not live to see the movie's success, primarily because the rap wars had risen to new murderous heights in which Tupac himself would be inexorably embroiled. His earlier implication with Sean Puffy Combs, boss of death row rival Bad Boy Records, and Biggie Smalls came home to roost as the endless baiting shuttled between the East and West Coast fraternities. Despite committing himself to works of positivity, Tupac was to be drawn back into the murky world of gangster rap following the November 1995 murder of former Tupac cohort Randy Stretch Walker in the Queens district of New York. With All Eyes on Me still at number 1 in the Billboard charts, as well as being a modest hit across the world, Tupac's profile was at its zenith. This increased profile, coupled with Walker's murder, ensured there would be little chance of the animosity in the rap wars abating. Indeed, there were to be nasty exchanges between Death Row and Bad Boy employees, which included the unwelcome introduction of a pistol after the Soul Train Music Awards in Los Angeles. Tupac himself wasted little time in stoking the fires with a series of incidents specifically designed to taunt the East Coast Brotherhood. In the promotional video for his next single, 2 of America's Most Wanted, Tupac joined forces with Snoop Doggy Dogg to enact a scene in which they carry out revenge attacks upon caricatures of Biggie Smalls and Puffy Combs, who Tupac believed had colluded in his shooting in 1994. He followed this up little more than a month later when Death Row released the track Hit 'Em Up, an accompanying tune to the single How Do You Want It. It is a brutal track widely regarded as a diatribe against his myriad East Coast enemies, and the attention it received could not have been less scathing had it been an A-side. With the ugly war now approaching boiling point, it was becoming increasingly inevitable that something or someone had to give. When it finally did explode, the end result, whilst hardly being unexpected, would still send shockwaves throughout the music industry across the entire world. The rap wars were about to create another martyr, and the hip-hop industry would, as a result, lose one of its greatest and most successful exponents.
Because I'm a little skinny nigga battling niggas 3 times my size. But Biggie is not a player. He's never been. He's never had bitches until he got some fucking money. That's a trick. That's not a player. He's not a popper. So my point was to prove him wrong. I took everything that he glamorized and I personified it.
Boxing matches featuring Mike Tyson were never expected to go the distance, and his latest bout versus Bruce Sheldon was to be no exception. Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight, accompanied by an entire team of bodyguards, attended the event on the 7th of September 1996 at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. The fight got underway at 8 p.m, and Tyson was announced the winner after less than 2 minutes of the first round. Half an hour later, those who had filled the Grand to witness Tyson's latest achievement left the arena and spilled out onto the streets of Vegas. With the occasion coming to a close in such a short space of time, Tupac and Knight saw their evening open up before them, and there was time to kill. Tupac soon discovered, however, that time was not alone. Within moments of leaving the building, both men became involved in a scuffle with a single individual near the hotel's Grand Garden. Although the police were involved to break up the fight, their investigations into the incident would determine that the third party had no connection with the tragic events that would unfold later on in the evening. Shortly before midnight, the pair had a further run-in with police when Knight was apprehended in his rented car for playing music at too high a volume and for failing to display the appropriate licence plates for his vehicle. The incident was regarded as a minor misdemeanour, though, and was not taken any further, with Knight escaping arrest and allowed to drive on through the streets of Vegas. Less than 15 minutes later, tragedy would make its fated appearance. Travelling east through the city, Tupac was standing upright in the vehicle, his entire upper body dangerously exposed through the sunroof. A sudden burst of gunfire rang out, and Tupac was felled, having taken 4 bullets to the chest. Knight was also injured as shrapnel grazed his head, but he remained sufficiently alert to maintain control of his car and was able to spin around and turn back west. Police trailed the car, however, and eventually apprehended Knight in traffic. Upon registering Tupac's severe injuries, the police immediately called for medical assistance, and the pair were transported to the nearby University Medical Centre. Such were the extent of his injuries that within minutes of entering the hospital, Tupac underwent the first of 3 operations to remove and repair extensive tissue damage to his body, one such operation in fact leading to the removal of his right lung. Knight was released the following morning after treatment for minor injuries, whilst Tupac, in stark contrast to his previous shooting when he discharged himself within hours, continued to fight for his life. A heavy police patrol appeared at the entrance to the hospital, naturally anxious to head off any further incident or potential retaliation. The following day, as Shakur underwent his second bout of surgery, a scuffle involving the local police and a contingent of Shakur's friends led to ugly scenes, but ultimately no arrests. Knight at this time gave a voluntary statement to the police about the incident in the presence of his attorneys, indeed spending an hour in their company as the investigation into the shooting gathered pace. However, there was to be a dramatic change in the direction of the investigation just 2 days later, as tragic news from the University Medical Centre was announced to the public. Despite 3 operations, efforts to save the life of one of rap music's most gifted stars were doomed to failure, his gun-inflicted injuries sadly beyond the help of surgeons. After 6 days in critical condition on Friday the 13th of September 1996 at approximately 4:03 p.m, Tupac Shakur was pronounced dead. He was 25 years of age. It was perhaps unsurprising that the pointing of fingers and indeed the protests of innocence, being as there were many potential suspects, began almost immediately. Many accusing eyes fell upon Suge Knight, but he emphatically denied involvement in any conspiracy, citing his brotherly relationship with Tupac in defence, and also made public his refusal to accept that Tupac's death was a product of the gang wars. Puffy Combs and Biggie Smalls each publicly denied any knowledge of the crime. However, such recriminations just days after his death were somewhat valueless. The fact remained that a mother had lost her son, and Kidada Jones, partner of Tupac at the time of his death, had lost her fiancé. Tupac Shakur was no longer with us, and his career, still burgeoning both in the cinema and in the recording studio, had been cut tragically short. His fans, distraught and bewildered at his death, would be offered the opportunity to deal with their grief as Tupac Shakur's career in the face of death was about to explode once more. Music and movies were already in the can prior to his death, and whilst he may no longer be able to enjoy the fruits of his labour, it was evident that the career of Tupac Shakur was an entity all of its own and would steadfastly refuse to die with him.
I said it in the beginning that I was going to take these niggas out the game, and sure enough I will. Already people can't look at Biggie and not laugh. Yeah. I took every piece of his power. Everybody that's trying to side with him or do a record with him or try to unify with him, I'm going to destroy. I swear to God.
Whilst the ramifications of Tupac's murder and of course the consequences began to sink in, including the death of fellow rapper the Notorious B.I.G. in an eerily similar drive-by shooting, his posthumous career began in earnest. Indeed, the first new product was available to the record-buying public less than 8 weeks after his death. On Guy Fawkes Night in 1995, Death Row released an album of new Tupac compositions under the pseudonym of Machiavelli, a name Tupac had adapted from Italian political philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli. The Don Illuminati, the 7-day theory, featured him on the sleeve as a Jesus-like figure, nailed to a cross wearing a crown of thorns, whilst the design mapped out the various gang areas of the United States. The musical content of the record found Tupac at his most profound and revealed tracks of depth and humility. It was as though, at least through his music, he had finally relinquished the superficiality of the gangster rap image. In spite of his death, in fact, because of the morbid curiosity that enveloped it, the album was propelled to the #1 spot. Similarly, sales of his earlier recorded material increased exponentially in the wake of his murder. For example, All Eyes on Me sales tripled in those commercially viable weeks following the death of a major artist, the record leaping from number 69 to number 6 on the Billboard charts in less than a fortnight, selling more than 70,000 copies in that period alone. Predictably, his death produced intensive hyperbole for those unreleased records and videos that Death Row had accumulated, which now maximised their sales over the store counters. Likewise, his unreleased movies were also to be subjected to increased hype. The movie Gridlocked finally opened in cinemas with a substantial side order of the elusive X Factor, the headlining performance of a murdered star whose untimely end meant we were yet to see the best of him. Indeed, reviews of the movie were mostly positive, many confirming that Tupac was yet to realise his full acting potential. His final film, Gang Related, was released later in 1997 and featured him alongside such established Hollywood stars as James Belushi and James Earl Jones. Despite the modicum of success he had achieved in the cinema, it was the medium of music in which Tupac really excelled, and once again he featured on the soundtrack of the movie. Released 9 days after the film, the album contained 4 new Tupac tracks and would see established Tupac fans satiated by the introduction of more new material. Tupac's grieving mother, Afeni, was successful in her attempt to wrestle control from Death Row of her son's accumulated material and established a record label of her own entitled Amaru, Tupac's middle name, under which she released a series of his previously unavailable recordings. The first disc she gave the world was Are You Still Down? Remember Me, a double CD of mostly original compositions and consisting of tracks originally recorded for Interscope between 1992 and 1994. The album features the thoughtful, presciently titled I Wonder If Heaven Got a Ghetto. The album was a success and gratifying for Afeni on 2 levels. It showcased once more Tupac's early promise, which in turn brought substantial financial returns and helped to alleviate the $5 million debt Mrs. Shakur had inherited as a consequence of her son's death. Yet, even after the release of this anthology, there appeared to be plenty more in the Tupac coffers to plunder, Afeni announcing that there were in fact more than 100 tracks yet to see the light of day, and both Interscope and Death Row themselves jumped on Tupac's posthumous bandwagon. A sprawling double album of his greatest hits was compiled and released before the end of 1998, allowing old fans to wallow in nostalgia and remember Tupac in their own way, whilst giving potential new fans a substantial introduction to his material. Before the turn of the century, Still I Rise, an album of B-sides and offcuts recorded with one of his myriad side project bands, The Outlaws, was released, as was a volume of his own original verse, containing more than 70 poems, which highlighted his thoughts and ruminations on life and existence. His legacy did not, however, end there, as there was still a wealth of remaining material to bequeath to the 21st century. Yet another collection of unreleased music, Until the End of Time, his 7th posthumous album spread once more over 2 discs, hit the record stores next. What this new material brought to light was Tupac's intelligent use of sampling, 2 examples of which would bring him significant European hits. Changes and the title track of Until the End of Time both borrowed well-known melody lines from Bruce Hornsby and Mr. Mister respectively, and recycled them for a hip-hop audience. Some would regard the media image of Tupac Shakur, a heavily tattooed loudmouth thug, as unfortunate, not in the least bit helped by his own endorsement of that lifestyle. But most recognise it as only partially disguising a multi-talented artist with a great gift of sensitive storytelling, evident across his extensive back catalogue and poetry. Tupac had achieved many things during his tragically short life. Number 1 albums, respect at the box office, and although perhaps occasionally being of a grudging sentiment, he had won the admiration of his peers in the highly competitive hip-hop industry. Despite such extensive achievement in his chosen profession, death at the young age of 25 has left his fans, and not least his family, somewhat shortchanged. The overwhelming image is that of an artist with still more to achieve and just as much to offer. The breadth of his talents and the nature of the modern music industry will combine, however, to ensure that the legacy of Tupac Shakur shall never be allowed to simply fade away. His music will always be with us. That night, in September 1996, a candle might have been snuffed out forever, but for many, the flame still burns.
Thank you for buying Maximum Tupac, we hope you enjoyed it. Watch out for further titles on Chrome Dreams coming up soon. If you did enjoy it or have any comments or suggestions, write to us at Chrome Dreams, PO Box 230, New Malden, Surrey, UK, KT36YY, or email on mail@chromedreams.co.uk. Details of our full catalogue are listed on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk. Thanks again for listening, and goodbye for now.